A Clarksville church destroyed in the floods.
The church now owns less than we did when we first opened.
When you go through deep waters, I will be with you. When you go through rivers of difficulty, you will not drown. When you walk through the fire of oppression, you will not be burned up. The flames will not consume you. We never stop. If Jesus hasn't returned yet, and we still have breath in our lungs, we refuse to sit back, slow down, or give up. We will keep going until everyone knows Jesus, or we die trying. Come hell or high water.
Now, what we've been doing over this series, this is week 3. Each week we've been going back to Isaiah 43, verse 2, which is kind of the heartbeat of the book and this series. And it's a promise, the promise of God to the nation of Israel, speaking ahead into the future. When you come out of captivity, even when you're in captivity, he's giving them these promises. And Isaiah 43, verse 2, here's how it's worded. We've been pulling principles from this. It says, when you go through deep waters, I will be with you. And when you go through rivers of difficulty, you will not drown. And when you walk through the fire of oppression, you will not be burned up. The flames will not consume you. So far, in the first 2 weeks, we've gotten 2 principles from that verse. The first one, just as way of reminder, we talked about how walking in victory involves walking through pain. Pain is just, we're just learning to embrace the reality that pain is part of the pathway of our obedience. The wording in Isaiah 43:2 says, when you go through the rivers of difficulty, when you are in the fire of oppression, not if. It's just part of the journey. And then if you were here last week, I hope you were encouraged by what we talked about. We talked about this big principle that what God brings you to, he's going to bring you through. Anybody encouraged by that thought? That if you're on the border of or going through something, the wording in Isaiah 43:2 says it doesn't say that we pass out in the river of difficulty or burn up in the fire of oppression, but that we go through these things. And we talked about how the same shepherd that's in the valley with you is the same God that goes with you through the hellfire and the high water. If he gets you to it, he's going to get you through it. We got to trust him in that. So today I want to give you a third principle, and each week as we've been pulling these principles from Isaiah 43:2, they're springboarding us into kind of the heart of the message. So today I want to give you a third principle from Isaiah 43:2, and here's what it is. For all of life's pain, there is always a promise. Again, referring back to Isaiah 43, verse 2, every time there's a mention of pain, there's a package deal of God's promise that goes with it. When you go through deep waters, I will be with you, he says. When you go through the river of difficulty, you will not drown. There's a promise. There's pain, but there's a promise. When you go through the fire of oppression, you will not be burned up. The flames will not consume you. So every time there is pain that's promised, I want you to understand God's presence is promised as well. There's a promise that goes with the pain. It's a package deal, okay? We got to see that, yes, pain is guaranteed, but God makes promises that go with it as well. They go together, just like the Chick-fil-A sandwich with the pickle, all right? They go together. It's a package deal. So life's going to have pain, but God provides his promises. Now, I want to throw out a question for us today. This is going to kind of lead us into what we're talking about today. What if God gives you a promise and you step out in faith and it just doesn't go like you thought it would go? What do you do? I don't know if any of you have ever encountered this before. I certainly haven't. It's been amazingly perfect and so easy along the way of following Jesus. Absolutely not. If you're following Jesus, you understand that there's going to be promises that you're given that in the moment, maybe even years, decades in, it's like, man, what happened? How did we get there? So I want to answer that question with a message. Here's the title of the message. Here it is. Just build the boat. We're going to talk from the original flood survivor, Noah himself. Hebrews chapter 11. I just want to look at one verse today, Hebrews 11, verse 7. Noah was the original Survivor Man. If you've ever seen the TV show Survivor Man, or like Bear Grylls, he's like trudging through the forest and surviving by finding berries and eating grasshoppers and all of that stuff, right? Like, that's all nice, but that's not Noah status, okay? Like, we got Noah in the Bible that is the original Survivor Man who survived the flood, the worst thing that's ever hit planet Earth, God's judgment being poured out literally on millions of people. And Noah survived it, but he didn't survive it by finding the right berries or because he was great out in the forest. He survived it by audacious faith. And we want to look at this today in Hebrews chapter 11. Just one verse, verse 7. Watch this. I'm reading from the English Standard Version. It says this: by faith, Noah, being warned by God concerning events as yet unseen, in reverent fear, constructed an ark for the saving of his household. By this he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. Hebrews chapter 11, in case you're not aware, is often referred to as the Hall of Faith. It kind of journeys through history, men and women who have gone before us, and it describes what they did, things that they did by faith. In fact, the phrase by faith is used almost 20 times in this one chapter. It's going to talk about all these things that these people did by faith. So here's what I want to do. I want to answer this question: what happens when God's promises don't turn out like we thought they were? As we just kind of journey through this, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you 3 kind of take-home thoughts. And then at the end, we're going to talk about how do you discern between, is this faith or am I just crazy? Because maybe you've found yourself there at some point. I want to kind of just break it down and give you some real practical thoughts on how that plays out to discern between the two. So I want you to first notice this in verse 7. Notice Noah's approach to building the ark. 2 phrases just jumped out off the page of me from this verse: by faith and in reverent fear. This is important. So this brings us to point number 1. Write this down. Faith and fear are a lethal combination. And by lethal, I mean not to you, but to the devil. In the spiritual battle that we are in, faith and fear are a powerful, lethal weapon that we have been given by the Lord. So think about it in your own house. There are certain things that on their own are not a big deal, not super dangerous. There can be things like we clean your kitchen counters or your clothes with bleach, right? Or maybe vinegar you use in food to flavor it. And although on their own they can have their own issues, when you combine bleach and vinegar, they can create a very toxic gas that can be not only dangerous, but it can become lethal. So I want you to think about that visual and just understand that faith all by itself without reverent fear is just it tends to just be a little bit crazy, because we have to balance it out with the humble approach of being fearful, reverent fear, humble, worshipful fear. And when you combine those two, I'm telling you, the devil runs for cover when there's fear and when there's faith. Put those together. And here's why I say this is so dangerous for the devil. Because when I look back on history, at the moments where God's miraculous hand intervened and provided for his people and protected his people and fought their battles for them, when I look back and I read about those moments, you know what I always find? Both of these ingredients. There were people who were believing by faith, and at the same time they approached God in reverent fear. Just understanding that I'm going to humble myself. And oftentimes reverent fear is displayed through prayer. God, I believe you can do that, right? Do you remember the man in the Gospels? God, I believe, but help my unbelief. That's, I think, in so many ways, that's faith and it's fear. It's just humbly approaching God. It's us saying, God, I believe you can do that, But God, I'm just going to submit my will and my plans and my weakness to you. That's the fear. Understanding how holy and powerful and great and gracious our God is, that's the fear. And then believing by faith that God can do something. Now, let me just also correct, because there are some people who you will hear preachers who will tell you that if you just believe something enough that you can kind of force God to do it. Like you can faith things into existence. Can I just correct that? That is just not biblical at all. Just because you believe enough in it doesn't mean God has to do it. It's not that. It has to be, faith has to be accompanied by reverent fear. But faith is powerful by itself as well. Think about times in the Gospels where Jesus would go to the next town and it said he couldn't do many good works there because they didn't believe. So when we have both, faith and fear, Noah says, by faith, in reverent fear, when we approach this, I just believe this combination moves the miracle working hand of God. And again, we're not forcing him to do it. But man, he honors this faith and this reverent fear. Okay? Now, let's take this a step further. Because we can't just have faith and fear. Here's a second thought, if you want to write this down. True faith leads to bold obedience. So again, I want to, verse 7, look at this. By faith, in reverential fear, he constructed the ark. It led him to do something, okay? His faith wasn't just on the inside, but it actually changed what he did on the outside. That's an important thing for us to understand, that true faith is going to lead us into action. Now, I think that probably if you grew up in church like I did, I grew up like going to Sunday school on Sunday. I had like my church clothes. I had my church shoes. They were shiny. I only wore them on Sunday. Had like penny loafers with a little penny in the front, okay? Little tassels on them, fake leather. They were awesome. Only wore them on Sundays. I grew up going to church in Sunday school, and I've heard the story of Noah 1,000 times, right? And I imagine if you grew up at all around church hearing the story of Noah, you've probably, we're at a disadvantage because we may have lost some of the awe of this story. Because a lot of times I think the story of Noah gets just kind of like watered down for kids' Bibles, you know? And we just are like, oh, Noah, I love Noah. Petting zoo, floating petting zoo, like I wish I could have been there. It's so great, right? I wish, no, you don't want to be there. You don't want to be anywhere close to that. Can I just remind you that the flood was God's horrific judgment on mankind, wiped out millions worldwide, so bad that when it was over, God put a rainbow in the sky and goes, eesh, I'm not going to do that again. It was bad, okay? Only 8 people survived. 8 people survived. So the perspective, I think when we think of like Noah on a felt board, we just kind of lose the awe of how massive this step of faith was for Noah. Noah didn't just build a boat. This is not just like a canoe that he put together in his garage with the door closed. This was a boat of unprecedented size. And by the way, most scholars will tell you that Noah lived in an age where it didn't rain. People didn't have boats. Like, I don't know about you and your neighborhood, but I have neighbors who have boats. There's a reason for that, because you can take them out on the weekend because we have a river, okay? Like in Noah's day, you didn't own a boat because what would you do with it? There weren't just bodies of water. You don't have a lake house. This didn't happen. So here's Noah just building a boat, not a kayak, not a canoe, not a pontoon boat, not even a big yacht, but the biggest monstrosity of a boat you could even imagine. On his front yard, I guess. I don't know where he built it, but and here's this guy willing to believe that God is going to do what he said he was going to do. And so by faith, in reverent fear, he constructed the ark. So if you really believe God, it'll lead you to do some seemingly crazy things at times. For instance, build a boat. Or my family story, move across the United States to plant a church. I left my job, I left our community to move to a city that had nothing so far. People were like, wait, what are you doing and where are you going? How are you going to pay for it? I'm like, I don't know, but I just know we're supposed to do it. As you believe, as you trust God, God's going to lead you to do things that maybe in the moment seem a little illogical. Some of you, God is leading you to take a step of faith and trust him. As you know, you're in a job that you're not supposed to be in any longer. But what's tying you down is, well, how am I going to fund it? I got to make money. But if God's told you to step out, like, trust him with it. Don't you think he could probably handle that stuff? He's really great at running the universe, it turns out. He could probably take care of your rent. And like, if he's leading you, then you're going to be willing to do some things that seem a little crazy. I've heard stories of people starting nonprofit organizations and forgiving people who deeply wounded them. How do you do that? By faith, in reverent fear. That's how you do it. Because here's the whole point. By faith, in reverent fear, he constructed the ark. What does it look like? What does your construction look like? And what I mean by that is your faith and your fear, when you combine them, what kind of step of faith is that going to lead you to take? Because you cannot tell me, listen very closely, you cannot tell me that you have the Spirit of God living inside of you that crushed the grave and raised Jesus from the dead, and you're still living the same now as you were before you knew Jesus. You can't tell me that. Like, if you have actually come into contact with the living God, you can't just be the same person. By faith, in reverent fear, you're going to start taking steps of faith. Now, it'll be a process. Some grow quicker than others. But the bottom line is, faith without works, James chapter 2, faith without works is dead. It doesn't even have a pulse. Like, here's the reality. I don't need to stand on a stage and tell you I believe in God. Just follow me around. I hope you'll see it. I hope you'll see it in my life that I trust God with my finances. Not always maybe as I should, not perfect in it. That I trust God and I'm willing to trust him when he leads me to take a step of faith. I hope that the more you get to know me and the more you're around our family, I don't have to just tell you that I believe in God. You're going to see it. And you know it's the same the other way. That I should be able to look into your life and I don't need you to write me a letter and tell me about how much you believe in God. Could we just hang out? I'll bet I could see it. Because true faith will change you. By faith, in reverent fear. Now, I think the most amazing thing about Hebrews 11, verse 7, is what's not mentioned. Okay, think about this. When I talk to you about Noah, what are some of the first things that come to your mind? Answer me. What are some of the first things, when I say Noah, what are some of the first things that come to your mind? Come on, what is it? The ark? Animals? Water? Flood? Okay, naked and drunk. That is part of the story. Now, if that's the first thing that comes to your mind, I mean, anyway, yeah, I'll meet you later, Josh. I'm kidding. Listen, when I say Noah, a lot of us, one of the first things we're going to think of is the flood. You know what's amazing about it? Chapter 11, verse 7, it doesn't even mention water. It's just like not even. The flood was the biggest event in Noah's life. Hundreds of years on planet Earth. He spent years of his life preparing for this, and the one verse that sums up his life doesn't even mention that, oh yeah, there was a worldwide flood in his day. Doesn't even say it. Why is that so important? Well, because Hebrews chapter 11 is not about what God did, it's about what people did by faith. That's the context. So here's a third thought for you. Write this down. I hope this is encouraging. Obedience is up to us, and the results are up to God. Okay? So this kind of just blows my mind. Because let's ask another challenging question here. It says in Hebrews 11, verse 7, that Noah became an heir of righteousness. Here's a wild thought. What if it had never flooded? Would Noah still have inherited righteousness? Okay, some of you are nodding. Others of you are like, I don't know, I'm not going to say anything. Listen, would Noah have still inherited righteousness if it never flooded? If God said it was going to flood and it never flooded, would Noah have inherited righteousness? Of course. Because, and here's why. Because it doesn't say that he became an heir of righteousness that comes by the flood, right? It says he became an heir of righteousness that comes by faith. So, come on, I hope this is an encouraging word for somebody here today, because Noah, listen, God did not tell Noah, save lots of people from the flood. He said, build the ark, right? He didn't tell you, make sure your failing marriage doesn't fall apart. He said, love your spouse and pray for them. He didn't tell you to go save that the salvation of your neighbors and friends is on your shoulders. He said, love them and speak truth to them and set an example to them. That's what he said. He didn't say heal people. He said, come, bring them to me and let's talk about it. Pray about healing. He didn't say, make sure that you provide all of the money that you need for all of the things that are ahead. He said, be faithful with what I've given you and trust me, I'm the provider. Right? The obedience is our part and the results are God's. Now, the only way that the results or the consequences are going to be on us is if we just decide, I don't want to obey. And so then in that case, all of the consequences and results are on your shoulders. But here's the beautiful thing. When you trust God and you take him at his word and you take that step of faith, then the results are no longer on your shoulders. It's not up to you. That's up to the Lord. You do your part. Faith, obedience, you take that step, God honors that step, and that's really what it comes down to. The faith and the obedience is up to us. And what God does with those things are up to him. The results are on him. So let me break this down super practical, because sometimes it's not so much about like you're unwilling to take a step of faith. You're wondering if like, is this even faith or is this just stupid? Okay, come on, let's be honest. Sometimes it feels that way. And let's be honest too, that sometimes faith feels kind of stupid. And sometimes we're doing stupid things and we're disguising them as faith, okay? Come on, let's be honest. So I wrote down like 4 thoughts that I think will help you kind of discern and navigate a little bit when you want to take a step of faith, okay? 4 quick things. These will be super fast. Number 1, when you know God is leading, then it's faith. You're like, well, how do I know? Well, I wish I had time to tell you all of the circumstances, but you're going to know. As you're talking with the Lord, as you're reading in his word, as you're surrounded by godly people, you're gonna sense the direction that God is leading you. So when you know God is leading, it's faith. But the reality is that sometimes it feels crazy even when you know God is leading. Faith, by definition, by the way, is a little crazy. It's believing what can't be seen. Hebrews 11, verse 1. So right there, you just have to know that taking a step of faith will always be filled with a bunch of what-if questions. So if sometimes you're taking a step of faith and it's going to feel a little crazy, that's all right. Here's a second thought. I'm trying to be super practical here. Second thought, when your motives are selfish, it's stupid, okay? Like, I'm just trying to level with you here. Why should I candy coat it? If you're out to build your own name or your own kingdom, then don't waste your time. That's a waste of your time. It's a waste of your resources. If you are out to increase yourself, can I just remind you that if you're out to build your name, the Bible says Jesus already has the name that's above all the names. So just don't even waste your time. God doesn't share his glory. His stated purpose is that the earth would be filled with his glory. And so if we are out to build our own glory, we're just wasting our time. That's stupid. Okay? If your motives are selfish, then just don't even worry about it. Number 3, here's another one. When people think you're stupid, it might be faith still. One name, Noah. To the anger of Noah's HOA, he built a boat in his neighborhood somewhere. Can you imagine if HOA, homeowner association, existed back then? Sometimes you're going to do something that God is leading you to do, and you know you're supposed to do it, and everybody around you thinks you're off your rocker. We sold our condo when we owned a condo in New Mexico. We just knew God was leading us to Clarksville to plant this church. And so months before, plenty of time before, put it up on the market. And like crickets, like nobody came. And so we cut the price and we did open houses and like nothing was happening. We didn't know what to do, but we knew this. We're supposed to be in Clarksville. And we can't afford to own a house in New Mexico and rent a house in Clarksville. So do we just wait around endlessly for the right buyer to come? Or do we just like pick a date and say this is going to happen? And we chose the latter. And so we didn't know how it was going to work, and we boxed up all our stuff, and we sold our condo while our moving truck was halfway full 2 days before we were going to pull out of town. I was carrying a box, and our realtor called, and I answered the phone, and she said, hey, here's the price. Somebody put an offer on it. It was way lower than we wanted it, but it left us in the black, and I said, sold, and I put the moving box in the truck. People thought we were crazy. That's okay. About a year and a half ago, a couple hundred of us caught the vision behind this vacant 90,000 square foot building, old Kmart off of Madison, the bypass. I shared this vision that God had led us there, that this is our Canaan, our Jericho. And so I had this crazy idea I shared with the church a year and a half ago, March 2018. And I said, hey, if God is leading us here, what do you do at Jericho? You pray and you worship and you march, right? So come on, church, tonight, 6 p.m., we're going to pray for the clouds to part and the sun to shine, and we're going to go out there and we're just going to worship and pray in that parking lot like we own the place. Well, the clouds did not part and the sun did not shine. And 3 hours later, 39 degrees and pouring rain. We went out there, and I thought, it'll be us and like a couple dozen people. Oh, no, 250 people showed up, face masks and gloves and scarves, and moms pushing strollers with blankets, and we just like marched around that place and worshiped like we owned it. And people thought we were crazy. The manager of Food Lion walked out like, do I need to call the police? Like, what's happening here? And I don't remember who it was, but I remember overhearing this conversation. So much confidence. I loved it. The owner of Food Lion came out, the manager of Food Lion came out, and he goes, what's happening here? And somebody from Awaken walked up and goes, oh, don't worry about it. We're just here praying because our church is going to get that building. And I was like, that's right, you tell him, right? That's faith. That's faith. So sometimes God's going to lead you to take a step of faith, and people are going to be driving by like, what is that guy doing with the boat in his front yard? Who are those people walking around? Like, obviously, that the church isn't going to get that. People are going to think you're crazy. And that's okay. What we need to move past is the fear of what others are going to think. Now, let me give you just kind of a fourth and final thought. When godly people think you're stupid, you're probably stupid, okay? Sorry. No, I'm not actually. Because we're about being real here, and here's the thing. When there's a chorus of godly voices around you who are telling you don't do it, pay attention. Pay attention to them. And I speak from experience on this. There have been times where I've pushed through with a decision, done something that all of the godly people around me told me it probably shouldn't do. Didn't make a lot of sense. I don't know if now's the right time. And for whatever reason, I stubbornly pushed through on it, and I hurt people, damaged relationships, regretted it. Proverbs 11 says that there's safety in a multitude of counselors. So when there's a chorus of godly people around you telling you don't do it, then listen. Now, I make the assumption that you have a chorus of godly people around you. We all need that. If you don't have that, welcome to the body of Christ. There's a lot of great people around here who maybe can at least relate to what you're going through if they haven't already been down that road. We need to all, myself included, surround ourselves with godly people who are going to help us make wise decisions. So let me also just remind you about people and the voices we're allowing to speak into our lives. Let me just remind you that sometimes God will use people to direct us, but sometimes the devil uses people to distract us. So God's voice always needs to be the loudest. And then as through prayer and through God's word, we discern the voices that are in our lives. So I know we talked about a lot today, but here's what I want you to do. Just build the boat. Just like build the boat. What does that look like? What's the boat in your life? I don't know. But think about it. For Noah, if the flood never came, that was okay because Noah did his part. If we never get Kmart, that's okay because we did our part. We're doing our part. I still circle it every day and pray. Now there's cars filling out the parking lot and stores going in, and that's okay. I'm just going to go there and pray until God redirects me, and if we never get it, it is not a failure. We stepped out in faith, right? So we just trust God with all the results and the outcome, and we can't control all that stuff. All we can do is take a step of faith and obey. So what does it look like for you to build the boat? What are the areas in your life that God has been telling you it's time to step out? It's time to take this leap of faith. I've given you the resources. I've given you the power. I've given you what you need to do this. Now build the boat. What's holding you back? Is it fear? Is it just like worry about what's going to happen? We need to learn to trust God that he's got us. He's gone before us. He goes with us. And he's in it, empowering us to take that step of faith.